Hey everybody, this is Jake Wynn with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, continuing on our South Mountain on Tour videos. This is a playlist on our YouTube channel for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Hope you're enjoying these videos so far. We have moved across the Old Sharpsburg Road. We're still in Fox's Gap, kind of the middle section of the fighting at South Mountain on September 14th, 1862. We're going to talk a little bit about the experiences of one man, a soldier who I, over the past several years of working for the museum, have returned to time and time again for an understanding of what it was like to be a wounded soldier during the Maryland campaign in 1862. And this is a man named Henry Tisdale. Serves with the 35th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, part of the 9th Corps of the United States Army that is going to serve here at South Mountain. It's going to be fighting for control of these mountain passes. Tisdale is a figure that I've returned to because, in part, his diary has been made available by descendants online. So thank you to those descendants for being willing to share their ancestors' words with us. And these words are quite powerful for us today. So what we're going to do with this video is examine Sergeant Tisdale's wounding. What it was like, his diary entries leading up to his wounding, his description of what it was like to be wounded, and then his immediate battlefield care. And in a future video, we'll go and examine some of the places where he was cared for in the aftermath of this battle, in Middletown, Maryland, as well as in Frederick as well. Tisdale joined the Army in 1862. He has been in the Army just a matter of a couple of weeks before he is thrown into the Maryland campaign. This is pretty typical for Union soldiers in this battle, in this campaign. There's a lot of green troops who had never seen battle before that are going to be thrown into the carnage here on the Maryland battlefields. So let's turn over to Tisdale's diary. He starts writing shortly after he joins the Army. And his entries go up through September 14th, 1862. And then there's a sizable gap in his diary, and we'll get to explain a little bit about that gap in just a second. But this is what he writes, Tisdale writes on September 14th, 1862. He says, quote, "On the march since the 10th, off and on, and are now encamped near Middletown, Maryland. According to reports, we are attached to General Jesse Reno's division of General Burnside's 9th Corps. Was some little fighting yesterday between our advanced parts of the Army and the rebels under Stonewall Jackson near Frederick, Maryland. The country through which we have passed is a very fine in natural scenery, interspersed with fine farms and woodland, the latter more of a true forest style than our northern woods, having much less underbrush and rocks, and the wood much larger. Passed through 2 or 3 small villages. These and the farm dwellings and buildings we have passed are far from equaling in style or taste those of the north, showing many of them in a dilapidated appearance, and far more whitewash than paint. One feels already the taint of slavery upon the land in the somehow thriftless and want of enterprising look of the country. Our march through Frederick, Maryland yesterday, and by moonlight over the hills and beyond, was very fine. The scenery from these hills delightful. This morning was opened and with the booming of cannon, and during the day, thus far, troops have been passing by our camp in one continued stream. It is hard to feel it the Sabbath. Prospects of our getting into action before night multiply, causing a sort of feverish excitement to come over me. Help me, my heavenly Father, to do my duty in thy fear and for glory, for Christ's sake. Amen. In one of the churches of the town is some of the rebel wounded from the action of yesterday, or skirmishing. Tears come into my eyes as I think of home and of the peaceful Sabbath there enjoyed." Now that's the last part of Tisdale's entry for September 14th, 1862. Later that day, he is going to be marched up South Mountain along with the men of the 35th Massachusetts, and he is going to be thrown into the fighting here at Fox's Gap. And this is what explains the gap in his diary, for he is going to take a shot through the leg. A mini ball is going to strike him, knocking him to the ground, and severely wounding him. He's going to find himself dragging his way to a field hospital here on the South Mountain battlefield. And so he gets back to his diary about 6 weeks later, while he is stationed, while he is receiving medical care, and he is going to look back over his experiences here on this battlefield and give us an account representative of thousands of other similar accounts here at this battlefield of what it was like to be shot during the Battle of South Mountain on September 14th, 1862. So let's keep going with Tisdale's entry. He says, "Some 6 weeks have passed since writing. They have been eventful ones to me, full of God's providential goodness and mercy. A good deal of the time I have been unable to write, and the remaining time I have been indisposed to it." At near 4 p.m., September 14th, our brigade was ordered to the front. A rough march of some 4 miles brought us to the scene of conflict, climbing steep hills, some almost mountains, crossing rough fields through cornfields, and some of the way at the double quick. On our way, meeting many wounded being carried to the rear as we neared the battleground here, and there a dead body was to be seen. A little after 5 p.m., were upon the ground where the booming of artillery, the screaming of shot and shell, and rattling of musketry told us we were in the midst of the realities of an actual battle. The sight of the wounded sent a kind of chill over me, but in the main, feelings of curiosity and wonder at the scene about me took control of my mind. We're drawn up in the line of battle in a cornfield, and then advanced through a sort of wooden field to a thick wood where we met the rebels, or a few scattering ones, for the main body was on the retreat. In entering the wood, came upon a large number of rebel dead lying in a ravine, presenting a sad and sickening sight. They were making an advance upon our lines, but when crossing the ravine, were met by a volley from the 17th Michigan, which so thinned their ranks that on that part of their line they made a precipitate retreat. Just after we entered the wood, I was wounded by a rifle ball passing through my left leg, just opposite the thigh bone. As the ball struck me, it gave me a shock, which led me to feel at first that the bone must have been struck and shattered, and for a moment did not dare to move, for fear it was so. I found on moving that the bone was not injured, and that I had only a flesh wound, which relieved my mind, and thankfulness to God that I was not maimed or dangerously hurt came. I think that shot must have been fired by some straggling rebel or sharpshooter in a tree, as we had not yet got up within reach of the rebel lines. I found myself in a few moments growing weak, and tying my towel above the wound to stop its bleeding, tried to make for the rear where the surgeons were. As I was limping off, a wounded rebel who was sitting against a tree called me and asked me if I did not have something to eat. Exhibiting a loaf, and going to him, I opened my knife to cut off a slice when he placed his hands before his face, exclaiming, "Don't kill me," and begging me to put up the knife and not to hurt him. Assuring him I had no intention of hurting him, I spoke with him a little. Found he had family in Georgia, that he was badly wounded and was anxious to have me remain with him and help him off. But found I was growing weaker from loss of blood, and that the surging to and fro of the troops about us made it a dangerous place, so limping and crawling was obliged to leave him and move for the rear. Soon came across some men detailed to look out for the wounded, who placed me in a blanket and took me to the rear to the surgeon. This is how Tisdale is going to get off the battlefield, encountering this wounded Georgian in his travels, shot through the leg, and gives a really quite a vivid account of what it was like to be wounded. Now, this next section of Tisdale's diary is of particular interest to where we are standing right now, because he's going to mention a cottage, and that cottage stood in the vicinity of where we are right now in Fox's Gap. It was the cottage of Daniel Wise, a farmer scratching out a living on the top of South Mountain along the Sharpsburg Road. Wise is going to see his farmhouse and his farmland become a battlefield on September 14th, and his house become a hospital and a refuge for the wounded, taking significant damage itself. And in the aftermath of this battle, his family's well is going to be turned into a makeshift grave for many of the Confederate wounded who died as a result of their wounds here. Dozens of bodies reportedly dumped down the Wise family well, leaving it forever tainted, also in the vicinity of where we are standing right now. So let's go on with Tisdale's account of his medical treatment right here on September 14th, 1862. The place where the wounded were brought was near a cottage, near which had been the battleground of the forenoon. Was fortunate enough to be placed upon a straw bed in the garden just outside the house, and had my wound promptly dressed. The cottage had a memento of the fight in the shape of a hole through its roof made by a cannonball. The fighting continued till late in the evening, our regiment losing but a few wounded among them. Our colonel lost his left arm, and George E. Whiting of our company one of his feet. He bore the amputation manfully. The house and outbuildings and the ground adjoining them were filled and covered with wounded rebel and Union mingled, all being cared for as best they could be, many moaning piteously throughout the night or until death put an end to their suffering. Friend Sabin R. Baker of our company took care of us, the regiment doing what he could and adding much to our comfort amid the confusion and suffering existing about. Again, vivid scenes of what was taking place right here on September 14th, 1862, a refuge for the wounded, surgeons operating on wounded soldiers, rebel, U.S. Army, being cared for right here. Among them, Henry Tisdale of the 35th Massachusetts. We're going to follow Tisdale along his journey, his evacuation from the battlefield here at South Mountain, back through the hospitals in Middletown, Maryland and Frederick, Maryland. Talk a little bit more about his medical care as well as many of the others who are going to be transported along with him. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, give us a thumbs up. If you learned something today, subscribe to our channel. And if you want to, and highly recommend it, become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Support scholarship and videos like this, and you'll know that you're supporting Civil War medical history and sharing these important stories. We'll see you next time.